Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto started the revival of the Uzumaki clan? Part 2. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Raiden was enjoying the discreet looks his companions were giving their surroundings. AIM had a very particular infrastructure and feel wholly unlike that of Konoha and most of the rest of the hidden villages, at least that he knew of. He hadn't actually ever visited Kiri or Iwa, but he imagined they were more similar to Konoha rather than AIM. He took the scenic route to the central office building as he was inordinately proud of the city despite having not lived there for long, and he wished to show off a bit in front of the Leaf Ninja. He noted himself that though it was pouring rain, the people didn't seem as weighed down as the time he had left just over 2 weeks previously. It seemed as if his cousin and Yahiko and Conan really had improved things in such a short period of time. They arrived at the administrative building, the tallest and most centrally located, and Raiden ushered in the 3-leaf ninja before entering himself. He walked up to the front desk, manned by one of the younger men he recognized from the camp when the Akatsuki were still considered rebels. "Hey, guess what?" he said, hood still up. The ninja behind the desk squinted, trying to figure out who would talk to him so familiarly. "Is that you, Raiden?" Raiden threw back his hood, scattering raindrops all over the floor, not that it didn't already have wet footprints all over it. "I'm back," he said, striking a dramatic pose. He took in the man's glance backwards and added, "These guys are with me." "Alrighty then, you'll want floor 17. The man waved them on, and Raiden took them to the elevator, where they waited awkwardly until they reached the correct floor. After a rattling stop, the doors opened and the 4 of them stepped out into a rather domestic scene. Yahiko was asleep, his head resting on a pile of papers. Nagato was sprawled out on a couch, reading a book tale of a gutsy shinobi, Raiden realized, and Conan was drinking a mug of tea and trying to balance a different book on Yahiko's head. Raiden was rather forcefully reminded that despite what the 3 of them had been through, they were all still only in their late 20s and entitled to a bit of fun now and again. It was just unfortunate that it was the first impression the Konohanin were getting. "Boy," Raiden said. "I'm back." Nagato deliberately placed a bookmark in his book and closed it, but Conan drew back and pretended like she'd been doing paperwork as Yahiko's head jerked up, causing the book to fall on his hand. "Ow." Yahiko stood, shaking his hand, apparently the corner of the book had stabbed the back of it. Nagato put his book up in front of his mouth, obviously hiding a smile, but Conan's face was impassive. "Hello, Raiden," she said, as if him returning from a foreign country with guests with said country was a common occurrence, which was rather impressive when one considered she'd just been caught doing something so childish. Nagato closed his book softly, laying it on the table, and came to stand in front of him. "It's nice to have you back," he said. "Did you get the response from the Hokage?" "Obviously he did," Yahiko interrupted loudly. "That was his mission, after all, and what other reason would there be to have a bunch of Konoha shinobi right behind him?" "It was supposed to be a polite reminder, Yahiko," Nagato replied in a long-suffering tone. "Because it's kind of important and I really want to know so we can plan." Yahiko huffed, one of his eyebrows twitching. Raiden snickered. It seemed being the leaders of a country had done nothing to dampen their spirits. In fact, it was the very opposite. Apparently it was far less taxing to lead a country than a rebellion, especially since the country seemed to be doing rather well. "Who are you, anyway?" he asked, looking straight at the Konoha ninja. Raiden hurried to introduce them. "Aoba Yamashiro, Raito Nami Ashi, and Gekko Hade," he said, pointing to each one in turn. Once they had been named, he turned and pointed to each of the AIM nin. "And that hothead's Yahiko, the lady is Conan, and the redhead is my cousin Nagato." With introductions over, Nagato led them over to a large table in another part of the room. "Alright," Yahiko said. "Time for business. Raiden." Raiden pulled the scroll the Hokage had given him out of his pocket and tossed it over. Yahiko unrolled it and started to read aloud. "To the leaders of Amegakure. The village of Konoha gladly welcomes your offer of alliance. We apologize for any damages we have caused you in the past and promise that as long as this alliance stands, we will stand for no damages to be caused to your village by ours and will aid you in the case that damage is done to you by others. I humbly request a meeting between us to work out more fully and specifically the details of this agreement. Here is Insuritobi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado." Raiden noticed the relieved looks on the faces of his friends and allies. He'd never doubted that the old man would agree to an alliance, but he understood the 3 AIM leaders' skepticism after the fight with Hanzo and Root. The Leaf Nin were looking less stressed too. He didn't understand why they would be nervous in the first place, as AIM was the one who had reached out originally for help. If they had hurt the Leaf Nin it would only hurt them, and if the Hokage had declined the alliance they wouldn't have been sent at all. The old man would have only sent Raiden back. "So, what do you think?" he asked expectantly. The three Aimnin just looked at each other. Barely a second later, Yahiko turned to him and said, "We're going to Konoha." Raiden walked over to Ichiraku's ramen. He hadn't had the opportunity to indulge for a couple weeks and missed it. It was just a bonus that Naruto and Satoshi were there. That red hair and blonde mop were unmistakable. As was the pile of bowls stacked on the counter between them. "Hey. A miso for me, extra large." Raiden called, sitting next to Naruto and looking down at him with a grin. "Raiden?" Naruto exclaimed, and Satoshi leaned forward to look past their younger relative. "You're back." "That was quick," Satoshi remarked. "I was expecting you to be gone a lot longer, closer to a couple months than only 3 weeks." "Well, it wasn't really all that difficult or time-consuming," Raiden admitted. "The leadership is mostly just Yahiko, Nagato, and Konan right now, with the remainder of the rebel officers running the day-to-day things, so they read the missive, accepted it, and made sure everything would be fine while they were gone before coming here to discuss particulars." Raiden's ramen was placed in front of him, and he inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of it, before digging in. "Oh, you Uzumaki," Ichiraku said. "You love your ramen." Raiden nodded wholeheartedly, mouth full. "Wait," Naruto said, puzzled. "Our cousin, he's one of the leaders, Nagato, right?" Raiden swallowed. "Yeah. Can I meet him?" Raiden tilted his head, pondering. On one hand, the two of them were prominent political figures, and he didn't know how the council would react to Naruto becoming close to the leader of a different country, albeit a soon-to-be allied country. And it was possible that Nagato would figure out just what made Naruto so special, at least, the Jinchuriki aspect, and that could spell trouble. On the other hand, it would be criminal of him to refuse both Naruto and Nagato a chance to meet another member of their family. Yeah, there wasn't really a decision to make. "I'll introduce you to all of them as soon as they get out of their meeting with the Hokage." While waiting for the AIM ninja to get out of their meeting, the three Uzumaki sat and chatted at Ichiraku's, the man himself occasionally butting in with a comment of his own. Raiden told them all about meeting Tsunade, which reminded him to start researching that masked temple, and about the scene Yahiko, Konan and Nagato had demonstrated in front of the impressionable Leaf Ninja. He then was able to hear all about Naruto's classes and how the teachers didn't appreciate his awesome prank. Satoshi had then reminded Naruto that most people wouldn't consider putting itching powder in someone's underclothes awesome. He then wrinkled his eyebrows together and made an offhand remark. "Some guy named Shisui stopped by while you were gone," he said. "He was looking for you, but I told him he would have to ask the Hokage about it." Raiden was mortified. "I forgot to tell him when I left." "So you know him, then?" Satoshi asked, raising an eyebrow. Raiden wondered if deadpan humor was an Uzumaki thing. Nagato exhibited the same expression whenever Yahiko did something stupid and tried to defend himself. "Yeah, he was my sparring partner while I was here. I might even go so far as to call him a friend." "He's an Uchiha, though," Naruto pointed out. "They're all super strong, right? That's so cool." "Yeah, I just feel bad about not telling him," Raiden said sheepishly. "I'll find him later and apologize." They kept talking for another hour, but it was the middle of the afternoon, between lunch and dinner, so they didn't have to leave. "They should be done by now," Raiden said. "I'll lead you to where they're staying, and we'll see if they're there." It turned out they were. Raiden had to state his name at the front desk before they were allowed up. He entered the room onto a familiar scene. Yahiko was, once again, asleep, but this time so was Konan. With any luck, Yahiko would avoid any new bruises for the day. Nagato was still reading his book, though he was much farther along than when Raiden had last seen him reading it. He looked up as they entered, Raiden making a shush sign back at Satoshi and Naruto so as not to wake the two sleepers. Nagato got up and shooed them out, leaving as well and closing the door softly behind them. "What's up, Raiden?" he asked, leaning against the door. Raiden beamed. "I'd like to introduce you to Satoshi and Naruto Uzumaki," he said, Naruto being the blonde pipsqueak. Naruto pouted, making Nagato smile. "Nice to meet you both," he said. "I'm Nagato, another one of your cousins." "We know that already cause Raiden told us that. He said you're really strong, too. Can you show us? I bet you've got some awesome ninjutsu techniques, man, I'm so jealous." "I don't know any ninjutsu techniques because the academy said I'm too young to learn them." Naruto babbled, not stopping for a breath until the very end. Nagato looked a bit bewildered at the flood of words, and Satoshi let out a snigger. Yes, I think, and I'm sorry." "It's fine, man," Satoshi said. "I've lived with him for weeks and I still don't know what he's talking about half the time." "Let's go outside," Nagato suggested. "I mean, I don't mind standing against a wall talking for hours, but I think you would all prefer to be outside. Also, Naruto asked to see some techniques, and most of mine aren't exactly what you'd call building friendly." Naruto's eyes had stars in them, and he made a beeline to the door to the staircase. "Come on," he exclaimed when he saw they hadn't yet moved and were just watching him in amusement. "I want to see." Raiden and Nagato looked at each other, then glanced towards Satoshi and then Naruto. Raiden jerked his head minutely in the direction of the window at the end of the hall, to which Nagato responded with a nod. They raced towards the window, Raiden opening it and climbing out, Nagato following immediately after. Raiden poked his head back through and said, "See you at the bottom." He dropped down to the sidewalk. They had been staying on the second floor besides Nagato, who was smiling. "How mad did they look?" he asked. "We'll see in a minute," Raiden replied, no small amount of humor in his voice. But it was barely 10 seconds before Naruto came bursting out of the front doors, Satoshi close behind, annoyance written all over their faces. "What are you so mad about?" Raiden asked. "We promised we'd show you some of our moves." Naruto's demeanor changed abruptly, and Satoshi's tense expression relaxed a bit. "To the training grounds," Naruto yelled, running off. The three redeeds left behind all had different reactions. One sighed, one smiled bemusedly, and the last laughed loudly before all three jogged off after the blonde little boy. They caught up to Naruto quickly. He was, after all, only a child, and they were all quite a bit older, but then they slowed to a walk. Naruto was impatient, trying to hurry them along, but it was much more fun to walk at a sedate pace and watch his frustrated attempts. That did, however, lead to an interruption of their journey to the training grounds. With only the slightest whiff of air as a warning, Shisui joined them. "Hey, Raiden," he said conversationally. Nagato had stiffened a little, his hand hovering near his hip, but the best reaction was from Naruto, who had been tugging at Satoshi's sleeve. "Ah. Where did you come from? And who are you?" he yelled. Raiden chuckled as Shisui raised an eyebrow. "Come on, kid, use your eyes. You're living in a ninja village, remember? See this headband?" Naruto looked defensive. "I knew that. So where do you think I came from?" The village." "And he gets it. Good job, kid, I'm Shisui Uchiha," he said, introducing himself, nodding to Satoshi and Nagato in turn. He turned to Raiden. "Hello, sparring buddy, nice to see you again, especially after your rather abrupt departure." Raiden winced. He really had been in the wrong on that account, but hey, making assumptions wasn't the smartest thing to do as a ninja, right? Ah, who was he kidding? "Sorry about that," he apologized. "It's just I had to go tell this guy," he pointed back at Nagato with his thumb. "And bring him over here for some, business." "That's Nagato, by the way, and you've met Satoshi, haven't you?" Nagato nodded politely, whereas Satoshi just stuck his hands in his pockets, having finally freed his sleeve from Naruto's grasp. "We were just about to go spar. Well, Nagato and I were," Raiden added, seeing the rather awkward display. "Want to join us?" Shisui looked over Nagato critically. He didn't look like much, Raiden knew, with his long hair covering one eye and his shy posture and generally quiet demeanor, not to mention the cloak that hid his wiry frame. Shisui was no doubt going to underestimate him. It would be fun to see his reaction to Nagato's crazy jutsu. "Sure, I'll join you," Shisui accepted with a smile. "So long as there's no teaming up." So maybe he was a little more wary than Raiden gave him credit for. But still, he hadn't ever seen anything like Nagato's jutsu before, so there was no possible way he'd be able to counter all of them in just one short spar. "Sure," he accepted. Like he wasn't going to play dirty. "Just let me draw a barrier around those two, I don't want them dying on me." "Yeah, that wouldn't be good," Shisui agreed with a wry grin. But that established, Raiden proceeded to draw a box around Satoshi and Naruto, who stopped bickering as he approached. "What's the line for, Raiden?" Naruto asked curiously, going to poke it with his toe. "It's an invisible fence," he answered, placing seal tags on each corner. "It will stop any jutsu debris from hitting you, but if you try to cross it, it will shock you." Naruto's toe was quickly pulled back and Raiden winked at Satoshi, eliciting a laugh. "Good luck," Satoshi called as Raiden walked away. He turned back around. "I won't need it. I was talking to Shisui," Satoshi said back, and Shisui looked confused. "What?" "Never mind," Raiden said. "Let's get started already." The three ninja faced off in a triangular formation. A leaf fell from a nearby tree. A gentle breeze blew through the training ground and Raiden slid his gaze sideways to Nagato. The leaf hit the ground. Raiden and Nagato both sprang at Shisui, who disappeared. Nagato immediately braced himself, grabbed Raiden's foot and flipped him back towards Shisui's new position. He threw Rain of Kunai, which popped Raiden's clone and continued on towards Nagato. "Shinra Tensei." The kunai all dropped. "What was that? And I thought I said no ganging up." Nagato shrugged and Raiden grinned. "We're ninja, aren't we? In that case, hey Nagato. Wanna go after Raiden?" He shrugged again. "Sure." And the fight resumed, this time with Raiden and his clones on the defensive against Shisui and Nagato. When his clones managed to separate the two, he fared well enough, but when the two of them worked together, it was rather difficult. They weren't using any lethal jutsu, and most of Raiden's arsenal was on the more powerful side, and thus he wasn't able to use them. Despite the jutsu restriction, there was still some heavy chakra usage from all three of them. A lot of the elemental jutsu, while powerful, could be decreased in force while still remaining flashy. Oten and Suiton jutsu were used liberally by both Nagato and Raiden, the latter also using random Futon jutsu that scattered the newly created mud everywhere. And Shisui's Kaiten weren't helping any, it just hardened the mud into a second skin that hindered their movement. And then Yuhiko and Konan showed up. "What's all this about?" Konan asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we were supposed to keep a lower profile, not destroy the training grounds of another village." Nagato looked away, an embarrassed blush high on his cheeks. Raiden let out a feeble laugh, but Shisui grinned. "It's fine, I'm supervising." Konan just surveyed the area, looking unimpressed. Yuhiko was trying and failing to hide his amusement. Satoshi and Naruto were both sitting inside the box on the ground. The three combatants were plastered with dried mud and the training grounds were unrecognizable. "Supervising? Right." She sighed and shook her head. "Anyway, Nagato, the Hokage wants to meet with us again, this time with the council as well. So go get cleaned up, we're heading over in a few minutes." "Right. Thanks for the spar, guys." He left with Konan and Yuhiko, leaving Shisui and Raiden with Satoshi and Naruto. Raiden looked at Shisui questioningly. "So yeah. That was pretty fun," Shisui said, following him to the barrier confining Satoshi and Naruto. "Who were those people, anyways? I mean, the guy was obviously related to you, that hair's a dead giveaway, but who were they?" He was wearing an AIM headband. Well, the whole reason I was in Konoha in the first place was because I was sent as an emissary to start a treaty process. I was sent because I'm strong enough and close enough to the new leaders, all three of which you just saw." Raiden knelt to retrieve the tags, Satoshi and Naruto were just watching, waiting for Shisui's reaction. Shisui stopped dead. "You mean that guy was one of the new leaders of AIM?" Raiden watched Shisui's retreating form a moment longer, realizing his time to do something about the Uchiha was running out. But how to alert the Hokage about it? Though his position as an outsider helped him find members of his clan more easily, it sacrificed his relationship with the Hokage. The old man wouldn't trust him about something this huge. He would, of course, check up on it, but he would then wonder how he knew, and that wasn't something that would be easily proved. Unless if he did tell the old man, and the old man became truly suspicious, then he would call Inoichi to go through his memories. And if that happened, the old man would know that he was telling the truth. And he might even be able to develop a relationship with the old man once again. But first, he'd have to think of a way to approach the old man without suspicion, otherwise he might not even get an interview with Inoichi. How to structure it though? "Hey Raiden. Hey." He was pulled abruptly back into the present by Naruto's exasperated shouting. What? Were you saying something?" Naruto growled. "Yeah, I was. I was asking why you were looking at Shisui so funny." "I was?" "Yeah, you were," Satoshi said, looking at him askance. "It was a little bit weird." "Weird? No, I just know. Not like that. I was just spacing out, he just reminded me of something. That's it. That's all." "Oh. Okay then, that makes sense. Like, sometimes I'll be listening to Iruka-sensei, but then it'll be boring, so I'm just staring for a really long time." Naruto chattered on, relieving the awkwardness of the conversation. "The council meeting was awful." That was a lie. The council meeting wasn't really terrible, it was just really boring. Seriously, he hadn't ever known that there were so many ways to restate the same arguments over and over. There were so many other things he could be doing with his time. The meeting eventually came to a close, however, with the outcome looking favorable. The council was at least considering the alliance. They were still debating how could they possibly need more time, but it was mostly decided. And now there was an opportunity to tell the Hokage about what was going to happen. "Lord Third," he said. "I have a question about something. It has to do with a mysterious addition to AIM's forces. I wouldn't have mentioned it, but, well, I saw someone at the council meeting today, and they looked awfully similar to someone I fought while we were still combating Hanzo." The old man's eyes widened. "Come with me, then." He turned to the other three AIM nin. "Did you also see these ninja who were fighting alongside Hanzo?" Hiko made a face, trying to remember. It cleared suddenly. "Yeah," he said. "There were these guys in masks, they didn't look like Hanzo's other men. But they were wearing AIM hit I-8, so I didn't think too much of it at the time." "Is there anything else you remember about the other ninja?" Konan and Nagato both answered in the negative. "Then I shall speak to Raiden alone. Will that be acceptable to you?" "It will, Hokage-sama," Konan answered. She turned to Raiden. "Don't be disrespectful, Raiden. And don't be late for dinner, either." He gave her what he was almost certain was a reassuring grin. "I'll be fine. See you later." After one last hesitant look, they three of them left, and Raiden was left alone with the Hokage. He followed him silently to his office, where the door and window were sealed shut. Who was the person you recognized on the council, Uzumaki Raiden? His voice was stern, his posture firm. This was the Hokage. Not the old man. Raiden inhaled raggedly. It was Danzo, Hokage-sama. The man with the bandaged eye and the scarred chin. That man was pretending to be one of Hanzo's officers when I knocked him out. The transformation released. I left him there because I knew I couldn't kill a Konohinin because of our wish for a treaty, but I was not aware of his political standing. I assumed he was acting of his own volition, as he was the only one there that I saw who was openly affiliated with Konoha. That is all I have to say on that matter, Hokage-sama. The Hokage had turned during Raiden's explanation and was facing out the window. Thank you for your forthcomingness, Uzumaki-san. I will take care of the situation. You may be dismissed. Raiden, however, didn't move. It was now or never. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I have noticed another certain issue pertaining to this village. The Hokage turned, his stiff posture had turned from stern to foreboding. Be careful how you tread. Raiden winced. That was not a good sign. I meant no offense, Hokage-sama. But I also believe that you would like to keep your most prominent clan in this village. Uzumaki, you are very close to overstepping certain boundaries. Do not. It doesn't matter, you have to listen. Raiden exclaimed tersely. This was more important. If he died from disrespecting the Hokage, that would be tragic, yes, but he had started the gathering of the Uzumaki, and now that Nagato was set on the right path and fully aware of his heritage, he could take over if he died. But this was bigger than just one life, even if it was his own. Their precious Uchiha clan is about to be massacred. If things keep going the way they are, they will be gone in less than a year. All except for one little boy who will be haunted by the memories of his past, his parents and family killed by his older brother. The cold pressure filled the room, and Raiden was startled when he realized it was killing intent emanating from the old man in front of him. How do you know this? The quiet gravelly voice asked. Because I have lived it, an equally quiet low voice answered. The cold pressure lessened, tinged with a sense of surprise. You have lived it? What exactly do you mean by that? I mean exactly that, old man. I'm afraid I haven't been the most forthcoming about my origins to you. It's true that I am in Uzumaki, and it's true that I am now an AIM citizen and Nagato's cousin, and it's true that I helped in the freeing of AIM, and it's true what I said about Danzo. But I wasn't born 19 years ago. He gave a wry grin. Technically, if we were to consult a calendar, the day I was born was only about 6 years ago. The Hokage's eyes widened. But how? The Uzumaki were known for their fuinjutsu, were they not? Most people don't even know the surface of what the Uzumaki could do, but sealing it was more like a bloodline than just a talent. There are some things that only Uzumaki could do, including creating seals that enabled the user to traverse time and space. The old man actually sat down in his chair. If I understand this correctly, then, you are really Uzumaki Naruto, come from over a decade into the future, to do what, exactly? To fix things, Raiden answered simply. And it's Raiden now, old man. You're so you've truly grown, Raiden. Well, of course I have. You didn't think I'd be short forever, did you? Geez, old man, it's nice to know you thought I'd be a shrimp my whole life. The old man smiled warmly. And in other ways, you're still the same. He turned serious. You do understand, though I'll have to have Inoichi-san check your memories, right? Of course, old man, I'm not gonna fight it. I'll let you know it all. But you really should do something about Danzo and the Uchiha, or it's not going to end well, I promise you that. Thank you, Raiden, I will. He stood to look outside the window and repeated his previous statement. I will. Dinner was an interesting affair. Yahiko and Konan had briefly met Naruto and Satoshi after the spar, but wanted to know more about them. And that was how Raiden ended up cooking a meal for 6 people, as Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato had invited themselves to the house, much to Raiden's surprise and slight disgruntlement. He wished he'd had advance notice, because then he could have prepared a really nice dinner, but he'd had to make do with what was already in the fridge, which, also surprisingly, was decently stocked. He thanked Satoshi, then immediately shanghaied him into helping cook before Nagato came to take his place. Which was a good thing, because his mind was rather occupied with thoughts of the Uchiha, and Nagato prevented charred food more than once. What's on your mind, Raiden? You seem unusually distracted. I don't think I've ever seen you almost burn food before. Raiden debated how to answer. Kurama. You got any ideas? He waited a moment. No answer. Kurama. No answer still, and Raiden realized his breathing was starting to quicken, and he still hadn't answered Nagato's question. The Hokage said something. He wanted to know whether he could see the memory of the fight with Hanzo. I agreed. There. That was a plausible explanation for his nervousness. It gave him a reason to go see Inoichi, too, without anyone freaking out about getting interrogated. Nagato set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. Are you sure you want to do this, Raiden? You don't have to, you know. He breathed deeply. You're right that I don't really want to, though not for reasons that you'd expect, but I have to. From what the Hokage explained, this man could be dangerous to Naruto. And if my memory increases the chances that he won't be able to get to Naruto, it's worth it. Is there any particular reason he would be after Naruto? Nagato asked quietly, going back to chopping vegetables. He's 9, Raiden answered after a moment. Nagato furrowed his brow. I thought you said he was 6. He is. But he's the 9. Raiden waited, it was just seconds later that Nagato's face cleared and he let out a soft "oh" of understanding. Raiden took the cutting board from Nagato and scraped the now diced vegetables into a pan. I won't interfere, then, Raiden. Just be careful, okay? Raiden's heart warmed at the concern in Nagato's voice. When have I ever not been careful? Well, we're off. Be good for the Hokage, Raiden, Yahiko said with a grin. Raiden scoffed. When have I ever not been? Nagato hid a smile at that, and Conan sighed. Well, come back soon. Even if you are our ambassador now. Raiden nodded at Conan's request. Of course he would. Naruto would survive without him for a couple weeks. He'd done it before, and with Satoshi keeping an eye out he'd be fine. He watched as their forms faded down the road. He was the only one, since Satoshi had work and Naruto had the academy, though the two had said their goodbyes earlier. It was time to prepare for Inoichi's mind jutsu, now, something he wasn't looking forward to, especially since he was already tired and felt a bit ill. Sarutobi watched carefully the faces of all he was passing. The expressions were primarily curiosity and wonder, in the children especially, but occasionally there was a moment of wariness and a glint of anger in dark eyes. He knew the Anbu at his shoulders were noting carefully those who expressed more negative emotions, however briefly they appeared. He continued on to the clan head's house. Fugaku was no doubt waiting impatiently to see what he wanted. He wouldn't be disappointed. After all, he was here on Raiden's advice, and what a surprise that revelation had been to work things out, straightforwardly, before they escalated into something irreparable. He arrived at his doorstep soon after and waited until the door slid open. There was no need to knock when his chakra announced his presence adequately enough. Good afternoon, Hokage-sama, Mikoto said kindly. Thank you for coming. Good afternoon, Mikoto, he replied. Thank you for welcoming a poor old man such as myself into your home. Well, you may be old, you have acquired a wealth of wisdom through your years and can in no way be called poor, Mikoto said as he took off his sandals and placed them neatly in the entryway, nodding to his Anbu to stay put. You're too kind, Mikoto, just as you have always been. Mikoto laughed but didn't reply, instead leading him to a room and sliding open the shoji door. Good afternoon, Hokage-sama. Please, sit. Good afternoon, Fugaku, he replied, settling himself on a cushion they had thoughtfully provided. Mikoto sat across from him, next to Fugaku. Would you like some tea? He accepted gratefully and Mikoto poured tea for the three of them. He recalled that it was something she had loved to do in her youth and it showed in her skill today. Once they'd all received a cup, though, the mood grew more serious. I'm sure you have some idea of what I would like to discuss, he said. Fugaku set down his tea. The dissatisfaction of certain members of this clan with the tension between the clan and village. That is essentially correct, he allowed. I have also come, however, to hear the grievances of those members and to form a plan to address those grievances in a way that will prevent drastic action. Fugaku grimaced. You know everything, then? I am the Hokage, and this in my village. It is my duty to know everything. Now that we've established our positions, we should look for a solution, Mikoto interjected. Preferably one with a minimum of violence. Fugaku looked at her, surprised. Sarutobi laughed. Ah, Fugaku, you truly are lucky to have gotten her to marry you. Fugaku looked a bit chagrined, Mikoto as well. Now, for the solution we must first define the problem and find the cause of it. The problem is that the Uchiha clan is disliked and distrusted almost universally by the members of the village. We have been relegated to one corner, trapped in our own prison under the guise of respect and privacy. We were given a position of power, the police force, but that has led to dislike and resentment. And that has only escalated since the Nine Tails attacked, as we put our duty first and stayed, evacuating the civilians as best we could. Fugaku looked almost startled as he finished his impassioned explanation, though his expression turned resolute and unapologetic. If that is what is truly happening, then why was a coup suggested? Would that not only increase the negative feelings towards your clan? The words hung in the air heavily until he spoke again. If I were to make a statement to the entire village, would that help? It depends on what the statement contains. That is only fair. I cannot yet tell you, as I do not know myself, having not yet written it, but I assure you it will only speak positively of your clan. That is only a short-term goal, however, and it will take more than just that to fully improve relations between the clan and the village. Yes, that's true, Mikoto agreed. With several years worth of negativity, it will take at least that long to improve relations to a suitable point. Then the two other main problems I noticed you mentioned are that of the clan's isolation and the exclusivity of the police force. Is that correct? It is. Then the next steps are to take are, obviously, to open up the police force to non-Uchiha and reintegrate, or at least open up the Uchiha compound to the rest of the village. Yes. And as for how to accomplish that? So it went well? Raiden asked, looking hopeful. The Fugaku and Makoto, yes, thought some of the others I passed looked malcontent, though that might change after I give my speech at the festival. Festival? Yes, it is, as you might recall, the 50th anniversary of the village is just under a month away. And as per tradition, a recounting of the history of the village is recounted by the Hokage. And this time I will be sure to paint the Uchiha clan in a more favorable light than they have been in the past. That's good, Raiden agreed. But enough putting things off, he'd never really been one to dance around what needed to be done. Where's Inoichi? I want to get this over with. Patience, Raiden, the Hokage said, looking amused. We're going to meet him at T&I headquarters. Well, let's go then, old man. He watched as the Hokage rose slowly and donned his hat. Patience is a virtue. You said that already, old man. Their conversation followed a similar vein until they reached T&I headquarters, where Inoichi was indeed waiting. Hello, Hokage-sama and Uzumaki-san, right. It's Raiden now, but yes, though it did used to be Naruto. Inoichi frowned and was about to comment, but the Hokage interrupted. That's why we're here to confirm his claim. Inoichi looked a bit uncertain still but acquiesced, leading the both of them into the main interrogation room. Raiden sat down and held very still as the two sides closed in front of him, leaving only his head visible. Inoichi took a deep breath and closed his eyes and placed his hand on Raiden's forehead. Next thing he knew, he was standing in a square tunnel. There was not water this time, and it worried him. Every other time he'd been pulled into his mind, there had been water up to at least his ankles. It was a sign of the chakra seeping out from Kurama. But it wasn't there now, although there was an addition to his mind this time around, he thought, noting Inoichi's presence behind him. Welcome to my mind, he said, gesturing around. My memories are this way, I think. Lead the way, then. They passed several passages at which Inoichi looked questioningly. Those are for clone memories. From shadow clones, he clarified. That's a lot of clones. Raiden shrugged, he'd honestly never thought about it too hard. He stopped in front of another hallway, this one larger than the others, and entered it. Which memories do you want to see? Actually, never mind, I'll show you some from when I was a kid. Here's a good one. Where are we going, old man? Naruto asked. He was half hiding behind the Hokage's voluminous robes, and Inoichi's heart went out to the kid. We're going to a ramen shop, the Hokage started to explain, but was interrupted. What's ramen? It's a kind of soup, with noodles and other things. The Hokage picked Naruto up, situating the small boy on his hip. I think you like it. Naruto smiled and buried his face in the Hokage's shoulder, only looking up when they neared Ichiraku's. That smells good, Naruto said. What is it? That's ramen, Naruto, the Hokage said with a smile. Naruto's eyes grew bright and drool escaped the corner of his mouth, eliciting a laugh from the Hokage. He ducked under the hanging cloth and was greeted warmly by Ichiraku, who smiled as well, much to the boy's obvious surprise. One miso and one shio, please, the Hokage said, and the ramen was delivered in short order. Naruto tried it, a little clumsy with his chopsticks, but then he beamed at the Hokage. It's so good. Raiden opened his eyes as the memory ended, revealing a shocked-looking Inoichi and expectant Hokage. He is who he says he is, Hokage-sama, Inoichi said. The old man blinked once in surprise. Raiden admitted his story was incredible. He himself wouldn't have believed it if he hadn't lived through it, so the old man's response was completely understandable before recollecting himself. Can you verify, then, the information he shared about the Uchiha? The young Naruto was walking along the street, head down, until a bright flash of yellow caught his attention. Do not enter tape was stretched across the gates of the Uchiha clan's compound, which were slightly ajar. He turned for a better look, but recoiled when he saw faint dark stains in a trail leading up the street. Two shinobi, both wearing flak jackets, were glancing over curiously as well, in quiet conversation with each other. I heard the entire clan was killed, one of them was saying. I heard that too, and they think it was the clan heir, you know, the prodigy Itachi, I think his name was. That's it, killing his own clan. There was one survivor, wasn't there? His younger brother? Yeah, I heard he was in the hospital, though wouldn't wake up. The scene shifted, onto another memory. The mask caught his attention first, next came the realization that the man wearing it was restrained by beams of wood that could only have been put there with Mokuton. Since when had there been another Mokuton user in Konoha? But then the man started talking, and he listened. He is a man that has become steeped in darkness, the curse of the Uchiha. That's a lie. No, when considering Sasuke, you must not forget Itachi, who died for him and for the village. That doesn't make sense, said Kakashi, who had been standing slightly behind the masked man. Wouldn't that make him want to continue on Itachi's will? Oh, but you forget it was Konoha's fault in the first place for persecuting the Uchiha clan. Once Sasuke learned the truth behind his clan's demise, he was filled with hate against the village and determined to destroy it, just as they had destroyed Itachi and his clan. He's telling the truth, Hokage-sama. In just less than a year's time, the Uchiha will be massacred or would have been. Inoichi looked tired, and Raiden felt the same, if not worse. He felt groggy and dizzy, almost sick. That jutsu sure wasn't fun to be on the receiving end of. The barrier around the rest of his body withdrew and Raiden stood, swaying a bit before he regained his balance. I think I'll just head home how, if it's all the same to you. He said faintly. Do you need help? Inoichi offered, and Raiden grimaced but shook his head. I'll be able to get home. He left, gratified that his step was fairly steady, and headed to the house. He nearly fumbled the key trying to get in. Where had his coordination gone? But managed to unlock and open the door. Hey guys, I'm home, he said hoarsely. He closed the door behind him, and Naruto popped his head into the entryway. Welcome home, Raiden. What happened? You look like crap. Ah, just a weird jutsu. I'll be fine. Raiden paused when the room started spinning. Naruto was scared. Raiden, one of the strongest and coolest people he'd ever known, had just collapsed. He didn't know what to do. He could call for help, but there weren't many people that would listen to him, even if he was trying to help someone else. He knew that. His eyes were starting to water and he wiped at them angrily. Crying wouldn't help anything. First off, he should get Raiden in a better position. Laying in the middle of the floor wouldn't be the best. So he put one of Raiden's arms over his shoulders and wrapped his other arm as far as he could and half dragged Raiden to his room and put him in his bed. Naruto hoped Raiden wouldn't be mad at him when he woke up for going in his room without permission. What next? He watched Raiden carefully as he thought and noticed that Raiden was getting flushed, which was weird because he was really pale when he'd gotten home and he was sweating a lot. He touched Raiden's forehead. Hot. Really hot. Naruto rushed to get a rag and soaked it in cold water and put it on Raiden's forehead. Raiden shifted, looking pained, and mumbled something. Was he awake? No, he was just muttering in his sleep. He did have a fever after all. He looked really sick. Naruto stood and clenched his fist. He'd have to go tell someone. As much as he didn't want to leave Raiden, if he got any worse, Naruto wouldn't be able to help at all. He turned to leave, but as he reached the doorway he mumbled again, this time loud enough that Naruto heard what he was saying. No, Kurama, don't come back. Who was Kurama? Naruto wondered, but paused. Don't worry, I'll be back, he said, and left the room. He stopped at the doorway to pull on his sandals really fast and decided he'd have to find Shisui. He was one of the few people that would listen to him besides the old man and Satoshi, and the old man was busy and Satoshi was halfway across the village. And Shisui would be in the nearby training ground. Raiden had mentioned sparring with Shisui this morning. Come to think of it, he'd been a bit pale then, too. So with his sandals finally on properly, he flung the door open and then ran smack into a solid body. He yelped and tipped back, but a hand on his shoulder steadied him. Gotta watch where you're going there, kiddo, Shisui said with a grin, and Naruto couldn't help it. He started crying. Shisui's grin vanished. Hey, whoa, what's wrong? It's Raiden. He's really sick. Please, Shisui, you gotta help. Naruto led Shisui into Raiden's room. Shisui pulled the cloth off Raiden's forehead and felt it. His eyes widened and he swore softly. Shisui handed him the rag, saying, go get this cold again, Naruto, would you? And when he came back, Shisui's eyes were red like how some of his other clan members were sometimes. Shisui swore again, a really bad word this time, and looked worried. Alright, Naruto, listen up. I'm going to take him to the hospital, but I'll come back as soon as I can and take you too, so just stay put, okay? Naruto nodded and held the doors open for Shisui as he picked up Raiden and carried him outside. As soon as he was out he vanished, leaving a small pile of leaves in front of the door. He knew Shisui was really fast from watching that spar, so Shisui would be back soon. That didn't mean he wasn't still scared, though Shisui had looked really worried. Was Raiden gonna die? No, that couldn't happen. Raiden was too strong. Right. Before his train of thought could go further, Shisui reappeared, grabbed him, and then he was dizzily looking at the hospital walls. He's in the room at the end of the hall on the second floor, but you can't go in yet. They're still trying to get his chakra back to normal. There was something wrong with his chakra. Shisui nodded solemnly. Yeah, it was going haywire, burning up his chakra coils from the inside and damaging his organs. I think one of the coils actually partially collapsed. Shisui abruptly stopped talking, and Naruto thought it might be because he turned pale at the news. He'd felt the blood draining from his face. Will he be okay? He asked quietly, and Shisui frowned. I don't know, Naruto. They don't know what's causing it, so the best thing they can do is to try and keep him stable until they can get a really good healer in to fix his chakra coils. And as far as I know, only Tsunade-sama was ever good enough to do something like that. Naruto took a deep, shuddering breath and clenched his jaw. Raiden was strong. He'd get better and he'd come back home and he and Satoshi would. Hey, Shisui, can you tell Satoshi, too? He works at the smith shop across town. Higa something. Shisui nodded and disappeared, leaving Naruto to find the room on his own. Naruto entered the hospital and made his way to the room Shisui had described and sat down on a bench in the hallway. He decided right then and there he hated hospitals. The blank whiteness, the sterile antiseptic smell, the feeling of hopelessness. He hated it. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Satoshi. Man, Shisui really was quick and ran up to him. What happened? Satoshi asked urgently. What's wrong with Raiden? Shisui said his chakra was really messed up so it was making him sick, something like that. He looked real bad when he got home and then he collapsed so I dragged him to his bed but then he was really hot so I went to get Shisui but then he was already there. And he took Raiden to the hospital and then me and then he got you. His chakra is messed up that badly? Shisui said part of it collapsed. Satoshi's face grew even more grim. Did Shisui say if they could fix something like that? He said someone named Tsunade probably could. But I think she's not in the village or something. She's not here. But then Satoshi's argument was cut off by a harried-looking nurse exiting Raiden's room. Excuse me, but are either of you Naruto Uzumaki? That's me. He blurted and the nurse looked relieved. Oh, thank goodness. Please come with me, Uzumaki-kun. He followed her into the room with Satoshi close behind. The nurse's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Naruto's skin started prickling as soon as he entered the room, but he forgot about it when he heard Raiden's voice. Naruto Raiden was saying, eyes feverishly glazed, but at least he was awake. Naruto ran up to his bedside and was startled when Raiden grabbed his hand, grip surprisingly strong. Naruto felt a heat come over him and orange washed over the room and Raiden visibly relaxed. An orange bubble thing spread around him, two pointy tips poking out of the top of his head, and he smiled. Kurama, he said, and his eyes closed. The fitful beeping in the background steadied and Raiden's face started to lose its feverish flush. The prickly feeling went away a lot, too. Naruto turned, still holding Raiden's hand. Satoshi, he looks a lot better, doesn't he? He trailed off at the unnerved gazes the nurses were shooting at him, but Satoshi's was as kind as ever. Yeah, you're right. There was something weird going on. Raiden didn't just get sick, especially not this fast and this seriously. That just didn't happen to Uzumaki, even if they weren't full-blooded. So Shisui's explanation of a collapsed chakra coil made sense, but then there was the question how. Chakra coils didn't just randomly collapse. And the fact that as soon as Raiden had woken up, at least somewhat, he'd asked for Naruto, and then miraculously that orange chakra, really scary feeling chakra, had bubbled up from Naruto's stomach and enshrouded the both of them, thankfully not burning their clothes or any of the medical equipment. And Satoshi thought that might be a major clue to figuring out exactly what was wrong with Raiden, he just didn't know what it was, exactly. What he did know was this. First, Raiden had a collapsed chakra coil that if not fixed would kill him. Second, for some reason Naruto's orange chakra was keeping him stable. Third, Naruto couldn't stay there forever. Fourth, a healer named Tsunade would be able to fix Raiden. So really there was only one thing to do: go find this Tsunade lady and get her to heal Raiden. As soon as possible. He'd have to talk to the Hokage for sure, though, and his employer though. Now that he thought about it, his employer's daughter was always going on about it, Tsunade-sama, so he thought he'd be okay on that front. But as for the Hokage, there was no knowing. He had to try anyways, though, so he went up to Naruto. Hey, Naruto, I'm going to go talk to the Hokage about this, see if I can't go find Tsunade. Just stay here until I come back, okay, bud? Okay, Satoshi. And I'll get one of the nurses to bring you a book or something so you don't get too bored. Okay. Satoshi left and made his way to the administration tower, hopefully he'd be able to get in to see the Hokage quickly. When he got there, though, the secretary told him the Hokage was busy and led him to a seat to wait. His knee wouldn't stop bouncing, all his nervous energy needed an outlet. It wasn't every day that his cousin was dying, nor was it every day he talked to a Kage. And speaking of, the man himself strode out of his office, a nurse at his shoulder, one who'd been in Raiden's room earlier. Hokage-sama. He blurted, standing. The old man turned. Ah, Uzumaki-kun, please come along. Satoshi hurried to follow along. They were going to the hospital, probably Raiden's room. That was good then, and he might figure out what was going on with Raiden, depending on what the Hokage said. They were quiet on the way to the hospital until Satoshi brought up his it wasn't an idea, really, more of a request. Hokage-sama, would you permit me to try to find Tsunade-sama and bring her here? With Raiden's problem and Shisui mentioned her, so I just thought. The Hokage turned to him, a serious look on his face. Uzumaki-kun. He couldn't help but grimace this time. With the three of us, please just use Satoshi. Satoshi-kun, if you can get Tsunade to return to the village, I will count it as a personal favor to myself. Raiden almost stumbled but managed to stay on his feet. Seriously? He asked. I have been trying to persuade her to return for the better part of a decade. I am very serious. They'd made it to the hospital by then, and when they entered Raiden's room, Satoshi shot Naruto a thumbs up and the boy grinned. Do you know what this is, Hokage-sama? The doctor asked. I have an idea, he said, voice rumbling. However, it is related to an S-class secret, so I must request all nurses to leave for just a few minutes. They all left, and it was only him, the Hokage, the doctor, Naruto, and a sleeping Raiden in the room. What can you tell us, Hokage-sama? The doctor asked, and Satoshi turned his attention towards the old man, as did Naruto. Remember. You must not repeat anything I will say here to anyone else. But here it is. Raiden had a store of Bijuu chakra inside of him, an artificial Jinchuriki, if you will. Somehow, though, it has been removed, and that caused the collapse of a central chakra coil. Naruto's orange chakra helps fill that void, but that is only a temporary measure. Jinchuriki is what we call those with Bijuu sealed inside of them, and if their Bijuu is lost or extracted from within them, they will die. It's a miracle Raiden lasted as long as he did, considering. But how does Naruto's chakra help? And if Jinchuriki die, then how will Tsunade be able to help? Will she even be able to help at all? Satoshi asked. Even if the answer was no, he'd still try to get her back, if only to ease Raiden's pain. The Hokage sighed, looking weary. The reason Naruto's chakra helps is because he is a Jinchuriki as well, the holder of the nine-tailed fox. Satoshi bit his lip. That wasn't the answer he had been expecting, but it made sense, considering his circumstances. And as for Naruto, he looked about to cry. I'm the Nine Tails? He asked, voice shaky, and Satoshi shook his head vehemently. No, the Nine Tails has been sealed away inside you. Naruto still looked confused. Naruto, it's like this, pretend you're a bull. And pretend the Nine Tails is Mizo Ramen. If you put the Mizo Ramen in the bowl is still a bowl, it doesn't become ramen, see? Naruto's face cleared. Oh, I get it now. But what does that have to do with Raiden? Well, Raiden used to have pork ramen in his bowl. But then his bowl got a crack in it, so you're sharing some of your ramen with him. And I want to go find Tsunade, so she can fix the crack in Raiden's bowl. That makes more sense. Why didn't you say that earlier? Satoshi sighed, but the Hokage looked amused. I guess it's a good thing I'm a Jinwatsu, then. Jinchuriki, Naruto. Yeah, that. But you should go find that Tsunade lady quick, cause I don't wanna run out of ramen. Satoshi debated telling Naruto that his ramen wouldn't be running out anytime soon, but decided against it. It would just make things complicated. Sure thing, buddy. Tsunade-sama is coming back? The doctor asked, excitement in his voice. Of course he'd noticed that. If I can manage it, Satoshi replied. And of course I'll try my hardest. The Hokage got up and opened the door, allowing the nurses back in, though there were less now, and beckoned Satoshi out with him. About that little mission, I'd like to send along a couple shinobi with you. I have two in mind, a censor and a swordsman. They can help you identify Tsunade, as well as act as protection just in case. Do you think you could set off by 7 tomorrow morning? Of course, Hokage-sama. That was good, it would give him enough time to notify Higurashi-san and pack and get some decent rest. And find Shisui to thank him. Hey Gekko, nice to meet you. Izuki Yugao. Satoshi Uzumaki, thanks for coming along. Pate smiled. I couldn't very well not come. I have a bit of a personal stake in this as well, as you might have noticed, he said, gesturing to himself. He did look rather ill, Satoshi noticed. And Raiden's my friend, I can't very well let him die. Well, thank you all the same. I hate to interrupt your budding relationship, Yuzuki interrupted dryly, but we have a mission to start and I believe Gekko has pertinent information. Right, when I went on that mission with Raiden about a month ago we bumped into her at Tanzakugai. But I don't think she's there at the moment since it's been so long, and I also know that there's currently a gambling tournament event in Hokage right now. So the question is, do we want to start in Tanzaku, where she was confirmed to be, or Hokage, where she's fairly likely to be? Yuzuki asked. Satoshi frowned. What does a tournament have to do with Tsunade? The two ninja looked at each other hesitantly before Yuzuki sighed. Tsunade-sama is a gambling addict, as well as a bit of a drunk. She's actually known as the legendary sucker in some places. Satoshi grimaced. That was some unpleasant news. But they seemed to have faith in her despite all that, so her healing abilities must be truly miraculous. With this new information, though. Hokage? His gut instinct had been right. As soon as they arrived in Hokage, he felt something that he could only describe as a faint tug pulling him in a certain direction. It wasn't a tug, not really, but a feeling that there was something important just over there. "We should go this way," he said decisively. Yuzuki nodded. "I sense minor chakra use from over there," she added. "Are you sure you don't have a sensing ability, Uzumaki-san?" "I don't know," he said as he led them towards the tug. "I haven't learned to use chakra, but it's possible." The tug was getting stronger now, and Satoshi knew they were getting close. And then Hei tapped him on the shoulder and pointed to a young woman with short dark hair. "She was with Tsunade-sama in Tenzaku," he explained. "If we follow her she'll lead us to Tsunade-sama." They both nodded and the three of them started following her unobtrusively, though it was rather difficult when she was walking so quickly. She stopped and entered a small shop, a sake shop, and they ducked inside as well, tracking Shizune to a booth in the back corner. Satoshi could only see that the single occupant had blonde hair. They went closer, and the lady in the booth turned and looked at Shizune and passed her to stare straight at the three of them. "Shizune, you need to pay more attention to your surroundings, you picked up a tail." Satoshi took a chance to study her face as she spoke. She looked surprisingly youthful for someone who was supposedly over 40 years old. Though that might have had something to do with the purple diamond on her forehead, he knew from Raiden that seals could do ridiculous things and that they came in many different forms. His attention switched back to Shizune when she whirled around to see who'd been following her. "I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama, but I was focused on trying to find you," she said, then lowered her voice. "There's an unhappy debt collector in town again." Tsunade frowned. "Alright, Konoha kids, leave, I'm busy." And Satoshi decided he really didn't like her, miracle healer or no. Still, she was the only one who had a chance of healing Raiden, and he wasn't going to give up just because he didn't like her. "Can you at least hear us out first?" he asked, retaining a veneer of politeness. "Sorry, kid," she said, not sounding sorry at all, "but you're out of luck. I'm just gonna finish my sake and then me and Shizune are gonna leave town before the debt collector shows up." That was it. He strode forward and slammed his hands on the table. "Look, lady, I don't care if you're the Rakuto-sanin himself. My cousin is dying and I need your help." Tsunade looked as if she was going to dismiss him, but then frowned and squinted. "What's your name, kid?" "Satoshi. Satoshi Uzumaki." "And your cousin?" "Raiden." Shizune was frowning, too, now, and Satoshi was beginning to think they had a chance. "Shizune, we're leaving," Tsunade announced abruptly and strode past them out of the shop. He and the other two followed. "So, kid, tell me what's wrong with the brat." Satoshi glanced at his two companions, but they both shook their heads. Apparently as they were representing Konoha they were being ignored, so then kid and brat must be him and Raiden. He wasn't sure exactly what he could say with Yuzuki and Hei there, though the Hokage had given permission to tell Tsunade everything, so he decided to stick to the problem and symptoms and not mention the cause until they were out of earshot. "From what I understand, a central chakra coil partially collapsed and his chakras started going haywire, which resulted in organ damage. He gets really high fevers and can't really eat anything." Tsunade's brow furrowed, her eyes much clearer than before. "How long has it been since it started?" 6 days. Shizune let out a gasp and Tsunade looked troubled. "Satoshi, that shouldn't be possible. Not even for an Uzumaki." "No," Satoshi interrupted. "They have him on an IV and they found something to stabilize his chakra for a while. He's not dead yet." Tsunade still looked dubious but allowed him the benefit of the doubt. "Whatever they're doing, it would still be best if we got there as soon as possible." "Tsunade-sama." The gate guard practically had start in his eyes. Was Tsunade really that famous? Whatever, it didn't matter, they'd have to stop by the Hokage's office and then head over to the hospital for her to do a preliminary inspection. People would occasionally stop and stare as they made their way to the Hokage's office, but they made it there without too much trouble. The secretary let them in, eyes wide, and the old man nearly spit out his pipe when they entered the office. "Hello, sensei," Tsunade said, and the old man could only manage an undignified Tsunade. In response. "Where's the brat?" The Hokage seemed to regain his professionalism and began to lead them to the hospital to Raiden. There were only 3 people in the room when the 4 of them finally got their aid, and Yuzuki had disappeared somewhere along the way. A nurse, ostensibly for monitoring the situation, Naruto, who was doing homework, and Raiden, who was attempting to explain something to Naruto. The orange chakra shroud wasn't visible anymore, which he thought was a good thing, but Raiden still looked pretty terrible, wan and much thinner than he remembered, hair lank instead of its usual spiky mess. Raiden cheered up visibly when they came in, prompting Naruto to turn around, and they both grinned. The nurse left quietly, with Tsunade there. Her presence was rather redundant. "Hey, Shizune, Bachan. You brat, what have you gotten yourself into?" Raiden looked sheepish. "It wasn't my fault." He paused, looking thoughtful. Well, I guess it kind of was, but I didn't cause it on purpose. Of course you didn't, otherwise I would be beating some sense into you right now. She poked Naruto. Scoot over. Naruto was really excited, bouncing in his seat at the prospect of having Raiden back up and well. Tsunade's hand started to glow green, and she placed her hand over his abdomen and frowned. I'm assuming the extremely dense chakra I'm sensing is the Biju chakra. There's some nature chakra in there as well, Raiden interjected. And nature chakra. And the lighter chakra is your own. Raiden nodded. Her hand moved around until she'd eventually covered his entire torso. I have good news and bad news. A section of your central chakra coil has indeed collapsed, and several tenketsu are either blocked or blown completely. The good news is that I can reinflate the collapsed coil and start the tenketsu healing. The bad news is it can only be temporary. Without the support of Biju chakra, it will collapse again within a few months sooner if you use chakra. Raiden nodded, face pensive. A moment later he spoke. And what if I were to seal another Biju inside me? The question sparked an uproar, and from what little he knew Satoshi was completely on the other side. He knew Raiden was completely reckless and just a bit crazy, but to do that? How would he even find a Biju? But as he thought about it, he realized it just might be possible. Raiden was a sealing genius, after all, and he had a lot of chakra, though he would have to be very careful about the timing of using it. Do you know where one is? Satoshi asked, his question cutting through the storm of words. The protest stopped and all attention was on Raiden. I do, actually. The Three Tails is currently loose in Mizu, he said. Mizu? Naruto asked, he'd been awfully quiet up until then. You mean the country with Kurigakure no Sado? Exactly right, Naruto. And Kiri's really mixed up right now so I don't think they'll notice. Then you gotta do it. It'll make you better, right? It should. And Satoshi realized that yes, Raiden was going to do it. Raiden wasn't technically a Konohinin, so the Hokage couldn't forbid it, and though Tsunade looked disapproving, she also realized that if he didn't do it, he'd die in a few years anyway. As for Nagato, there was no way he wouldn't agree if it was for Raiden, and the political issue was pretty much moot if Kiri even noticed the Three Tails being gone. They couldn't very well pick a fight with AIM because of the new alliance. And Kiri's military was in a mess anyway, from the civil war. It just might work. Can you just stay for the festival? Naruto pleaded. It's only 2 weeks away. Sorry, Naruto, but I can't. Without chakra, it will take me a week to get to AIM, and a further 3 weeks minimum to get to Mizu no Kuni after that. That's already a month of travel time even though I wish I could stay, I just can't. Cheer up, Naruto, he'll be back before you know it, Satoshi said. There was a faint sense of resignation in his words, and Raiden knew Satoshi would miss him just as much as Naruto would, just as much as he'd miss the both of them. And if you do well in school I'll teach you a jutsu when I get back. Naruto looked excited, and Raiden didn't really want to ruin that by telling him it wouldn't be above a C rank, though he had yet to decide which one. He still had to prepare for his trip. Tsunade had finally let him out after another day and a half of observation. Given his current ban on chakra, his seals were out. Manual carrying it was, which meant he'd need to get everything he needed out of his seals. Which, in his infinite wisdom, were etched into his belt. He shrugged, pulled it off, and handed it to Naruto, who looked completely baffled. Can you channel a bit of chakra and touch here and here? He asked, pointing at 2 different seals. Naruto still looked confused. Raiden remembered at that age he'd known practically nothing about seals, but did as he said anyway, and a pile of stuff fell out at his feet. Which included, but wasn't limited to, an old bedroll, a handful of ration bars, a few packets of food and chakra pills. One of the pills was one of Sakura's monstrosities, a canteen, water purifying tablets, basically anything he'd need to survive off the land. Those things all came from the first seal, the other had contained empty storage seals, which had unfortunately fluttered all around Naruto and were completely disorganized. He really only needed the chakra storages. If Naruto charged them with 9 tails chakra, he'd have what amounted to a portable life support system. He took his belt back from Naruto and buckled it back on, then grabbed a backpack that fit snugly. That was good, it meant it wouldn't shift when running, and started tossing things in. He'd leave tomorrow morning, and if he packed now he'd be able to leave earlier. Are you going to see me off tomorrow, Naruto? He asked. I'll be leaving early. Of course. Naruto looked scandalized. I'll say goodbye even if I'm asleep. Raiden laughed and Satoshi cracked a smile. He'd be sure to wake him up in the morning to say goodbye before he left. Good morning, Naruto. Raiden said cheerily. He would have pulled up the blinds on his window, but the sun was only just beginning to rise, and it wasn't light enough to help wake him up. Naruto mumbled and pulled his pillow closer to his chest. Somehow he'd ended up facing the opposite direction he'd gone to sleep in, with the covers in a heap in the opposite corner of the room. He knelt closer to the bed and shook his shoulder gently. Wake up, kiddo, I'm leaving soon. Huh? Right. Naruto sat up and blinked blearily. His head drooped forward, but Satoshi came in a second later. Food. He was holding a cup of ramen, and the smell seemed to wake Naruto up a bit. He started to drool and was at least awake enough to wipe his mouth on his sleeve. It was progress. The ramen did smell good, and Raiden's stomach growled. Satoshi gave him a flat look, and Raiden smiled sheepishly. "Good thing I made 3, then," he said, and deposited the cup in Raiden's hands. A moment later he returned with 2 other ramen cups and handed one to Naruto, whose eyes had cleared though he still looked tired. Naruto slid down from his bed and they sat in a triangle on the wood floor, all slurping ramen. Naruto finished first and placed his cup in the middle of the space, and Raiden was done soon after and plunked his cup on Naruto's. They both watched Satoshi expectantly, and he stopped eating and scowled. "How am I supposed to finish if you keep staring at me?" he asked, and Raiden and Naruto looked at each other and burst out laughing. He finished and stacked his ramen cup on the 3 of theirs, creating a mini tower of disposable ramen cups. The 3 of them looked at it for a while, not really knowing what to do with it, then Naruto poked it and it fell over. Raiden sighed and picked it up, he'd toss it in the trash while Naruto got dressed. Satoshi followed him out and they waited for Naruto to get ready, which took less than a minute, and Raiden had suspicions that Naruto hadn't brushed his teeth. He let it drop though, because he did have to leave. He'd waited long enough as it was, but he'd wanted to let Naruto have the opportunity to say goodbye, Satoshi too. He grabbed his pack and stood, and Naruto and Satoshi did as well. They accompanied him to the gate, where he stopped. He gave Satoshi a fist bump and a reassuring smile, then knelt down and hugged Naruto. "I'll be back soon, don't worry. And I'll be as good as new." He pulled back and Naruto put on a brave smile, though his eyes were watery. "And don't forget you promised to teach me a jutsu." "Don't worry, I won't." Satoshi stood quietly. He wasn't one for big emotional displays. But he offered Raiden a smile, which he returned before stepping out of the village. He held his hand up in a wave, but didn't look back. It was different, knowing he was alone now. He'd been lonely during his childhood, always longing for acknowledgement, but though he hadn't known it, his parents and Kurama had always been with him. The long empty road stretched before him, and since the road had left Konoha's forests, it had only been grasslands. They extended out as far as he could see, and that in the cloudless expanse of blue sky made him feel small and powerless. He laughed without any humor. He was alone, and he was powerless. He missed Kurama. He missed everyone, really, those who he'd left, those who had died. Kurama, his parents, Jiraiya, the old man, Tsunade, Kakashi, his teammates, Konohamaru, his friends. He'd never see them again. Not as he remembered them. They were all gone. He let out another choked laugh and wondered why, because there was nothing funny about it. He could die on this road, a wild animal could attack him, he could fall from a tree, he could die, and he would be all alone. And it was his fault. If he'd been better, faster, stronger during the war, everything would be different. His friends would all be safe, Tsunade would be complaining about paperwork, Shizune would be trying to keep her away from the sake, Kakashi would be reading his book and giving them pointers while watching them train, or maybe he'd be training with them. Uchiha would be making ramen, assisted by Am and Iruka, and it had been a few years, maybe there would be a little kid toddling around. But imagining only hurt more, it was why he'd kept himself so busy after arriving in the past. His vision blurred and he swiped under his eyes with his thumb, brushing away the tears before they fell. More took their place and he let them fall. There was no one around to see him cry, so he might as well. In just a few months he joined a rebellion, fought in a civil war, helped win said civil war, met 2 cousins, one of which he hadn't even known he'd had become the ambassador between Aim and Konoha, helped create an alliance, cast suspicion on Danzu, made a friend, told the old man who he really was, gotten interrogated by Yamanaka. Had his most trusted friend get absorbed by his other self, and almost died. Several times. By keeping himself busy he'd not had time enough to think about it, but that also meant he'd not had time to properly grieve and work through things. This little quest of his, it wasn't just about physical healing. It was about spiritual healing, too. By the sage, Raiden, what happened to you? He dropped his travel pack and slumped into one of the chairs. Traveling without chakra was more tiring than he'd expected, though that also could be that he was still pretty weak. Oh, just a life-changing revelation. Some clearing of emotional baggage. Oh, and I might have lost a biju that was previously inside me and collapsed a chakra coiler too. No biggie, really. Hiko gaped, Nagato's jaw clenched, and Conan's lips pressed into a thin line. "How are you still alive?" she asked. He knew she didn't mean to sound callous, but it was a miracle he was alive, so he didn't blame her. "Tsunade botched and patched me up, but it's temporary. In order for me to really truly get better, I need a permanent source of biju chakra." "Raiden, I swear, you're just trying to be confusing. Just start from the beginning, please." "The beginning?" And not for the first time, he wondered whether keeping them in the dark would be more beneficial or painful in the long run, before deciding that after all they'd done for each other, they deserved to know. And then he remembered what Itachi has said to him: however strong you become, never seek to bear everything alone. If you do, failure is certain. And his decision was made. Very well then. The beginning. It started when the nine-tailed fox attacked Konoha and my father, the fourth Hokage, sealed it into me on the day of my birth. Wait, how is that? Yuhiko began. Space-time jutsu, Nagato explained. He'd always been quick on the uptake. Just listen. So Raiden explained a bit about how he grew up and the devastation of the war and about how he'd returned to the past. And then, background established, explained his current situation. The silence once he'd finished lasted a good few minutes, his three friends, though they were really more like family, taking in and processing his story. So you need Bijuu chakra, Nagato stated, and the only Bijuu currently without a Jinchuriki is the three tails and Mizu. Yes. And you think you could seal the three tails into yourself? It's possible. I say go for it, Yuhiko said. What is there to lose? Goodwill with Mizu. Even if they figure out we have their Bijuu, they're not in a position to do anything. They'd be fools to attack in their current state, not even considering our recent alliance with Konoha. Sometimes Raiden forgot how tactically smart Yuhiko was. Despite his goofy attitude, he was amazingly intuitive. Rest here for a couple days and restock. After that, I'll head out with you until we reach Mizu. But Nagato, Raiden protested. You have a village to run. He trailed off, taking note of the three in front of him. Nagato's expression was what he'd heard others describe as set in stone, and Konan and Yuhiko were smiling faintly. All right. Fine. And he did have to admit, it was probably a good idea. With both Yuhiko and Konan still in aim, the city would be fine. And, loath though he was to admit it, likely wouldn't last against any opponent higher than B rank. In the case of that happening, Nagato would be able to protect him. Now that that's settled, Nagato said, it's time for dinner. You'll be joining us, Raiden, and then go to sleep. Raiden complied without much fuss. Though it was occasionally completely humiliating when people mothered him, it still warmed something inside him. It was a validation that they truly did care. That he had a family now. His friends from the past had occasionally been like family, but they'd done so much less than they could have, he realized that now. The old man and Tsunade had been busy with their duties as Kage. Kakashi-sensei had been haunted by his own past and could barely take care of himself adequately. Sakura, once he'd failed to bring back Sasuke the first time, had meant well, but then her false confession, she had never really gotten to know him. Sasuke, well, he didn't have the best role model, but most brothers didn't try to kill each other. And Hinata, he'd never really known how to act around her. There were two people he'd really seen as family. Konohamaru and Jiraiya. Konohamaru had been an amazing younger brother. He'd listened eagerly to whatever he'd had to say and never shunned or hated or disliked him, not after that first day together, not even when he'd learned about the fox. And at the Chunin exams, though he'd been a bit disappointed at not gaining the rank, he'd also never been prouder. And Jiraiya, for all his faults, had instilled in him the most important things, the values he'd incorporated into his Nindo. He'd taught him, paid attention to him, made him feel appreciated and loved. And the brief moments that he'd finally been able to meet his parents, it was the same warmth he felt when he was with the three of them, and Satoshi and Naruto. You guys, he trailed off, unable to vocalize what he was feeling, but somehow they understood. It's stir-fry tonight, Yuhiko said. I'll make sure to give you extra vegetables to keep your strength up. Of course, there were also the times when family members lived to annoy each other. Time to go, Nagato, Raiden announced cheerfully the next morning, though it could barely be called, such as it was still dark enough that he could barely make out the wall opposite. And of course, Nagato was still asleep. But they had to cross the entirety of Hai no Kuni, so the sooner they left, the better. Nagato groaned in protest. What time is it? He asked, blinking and rubbing his eyes. 5 something. Raiden answered, and Nagato frowned. Raiden, I am not leaving until 7 at the earliest. But we have a whole country to cover. He pointed out, and Nagato yawned. Raiden, I have a bird summons that will get us there in 2 days. He stopped short. Oh yeah. Forgot about that. Nagato sighed. Might as well get up, then, since I'm already awake. Raiden smiled sheepishly. Sorry. You should be now. I'm going to make you ride in its beak. Oh no, not the beak. He said it mockingly, but that actually really didn't sound fun. What can I do to avoid that terrible punishment? Make breakfast, Nagato answered, chucking his pillow at him. Yes, oh great Nagato dono, he said, bowing deeply. I shall prepare the best breakfast ever eaten by man. Nagato growled and Raiden ducked out quickly, grinning, before Nagato decided it was a good idea to throw something more injurious, like a kunai or shuriken. Or maybe a sandal. He was chuckling to himself as he made his way to their kitchen and turned on the stove. Omelette sounded good for lasting energy and nutrients, which he desperately needed after a week of not being able to eat nearly anything, and another week soon after with only ration bars and whatever he'd found to supplement them. So Nagato was then gratified when he came downstairs to see a very nice omelette waiting for him. And then Yahiko appeared. Raiden thought the smell of food had woken him, and then Conan, who he suspected was woken by the noise Yahiko made when he got up. The second omelette finished cooking and he put it on a plate in front of Yahiko, who couldn't function until he'd gotten some food in him, and started on the third. "Thanks, Rai," Conan said once she got hers. "Don't thank me, thank Nagato," he deflected. "He bullied me into it." "Thank you too, then, Nagato." Nagato shrugged and finished up, heading over to the sink and washing his plate as Raiden finished making the last omelette for himself. It was quiet but comfortable. He relaxed in the homey atmosphere as he ate his omelette. It seemed like a trivial thing, but peacefulness was a hard thing to come by. Yahiko finished a moment later, looking far more awake, and went to help Nagato wash the dishes. "Good luck," Conan said, and he turned towards her, an inquisitive look on her face. "You're going to need it." "Probably," he agreed, shrugging. "But my luck has always pulled through when I really needed it." Nagato and Yahiko had finished the dishes by this point and had both disappeared into their rooms, Yahiko to get dressed, most likely, and Nagato to grab a pack. Conan had dressed before getting breakfast, so they continued to talk until the both of them reappeared. "All ready to go then?" he asked, and Nagato nodded. They headed out together and started walking. It was probably best Nagato didn't summon his bird in the middle of the city, as it was rather large and the buildings were rather close together. Once they'd reached the outskirts of the city, though, he performed the jutsu and a massive bird appeared, and boy was it ugly. Its head and beak were massive, almost outmassing its body, and it quirked its head with such a jerky motion. It gave him the creeps. Nagato grabbed him and jumped on, and the bird took off with a screeching squawk. Raiden clapped his hands over his ears and glared at Nagato, who looked completely unaffected. "This is a demon bird," he said as soon as the noise went away. "This demon bird is saving you weeks of travel," Nagato pointed out, logic impeccable. "And it's only for 2 days." Raiden sat. He still didn't like the bird. It had been 2 weeks since Nagato had dropped him off at the border of Mizu, 2 weeks on his own, trying to find a Sobu which he hadn't, but because of his handicap, he'd only been able to search the part of Mizu connected to the mainland. He'd managed to find a good routine, at least one that would allow him to cover as much ground as possible. He'd wake up, take down his camp, really only his bedroll, and start walking. If he was lucky he'd find some berries or something to eat, if not it was food, pills and ration bars. As it began to get dark he'd strike camp, catch fish, rivers were plentiful in Mizu, and meditate into sage mode and try to sense a Sobu. Then he'd sleep, having been exhausted by the day's traveling. Now, though, he needed a boat. It was possible he could walk across the water, as he wouldn't actually be expelling the chakra, but he didn't want to risk it, so a boat it was. He knew from the previous night's meditation there was a town nearby, and he headed toward it. It was fairly large, and there was a good chance someone there had a boat he could buy. Because renting probably wasn't the best, there was a good chance it would get wrecked along the way. So he trekked in the direction of the village. It wasn't too far away, thankfully, and found a man on the outskirts, an old fisherman with 2 boats. One was floating, tied to a mooring on a small dock, the other was pulled up onto the sand. "Excuse me, sir," he called, and the old man, who was unwinding the rope of the ship in the water, looked up. "Yes?" he asked warily. With the civil war having just ended, random travelers were something to be suspicious of. But it couldn't be helped. "Do you need that boat?" he asked, gesturing towards the boat on the sand. The old man scoffed. "She ain't been seaworthy nigh on 5 or so years, boy. You see apostrophe NAV are cheap. He should have realized that. But he could always work something out. What if I help out, then we can work together and get her seaworthy again. She needs part of her hull replaced, a new rudder, and to be entirely recalked. It would cost him another 2 weeks, at least, but he did need a boat, or else he'd not be able to explore the other 80% of the country, and there weren't exactly regular ferries. So he made a deal with the fisherman. He'd help the old man fish in the morning, and the late afternoons and evening they'd work on the boat. He even got a place to sleep, though it was just the floor, at least there was a roof. 16 days later he left in the newly repaired boat, sailing southeast to the nearest of the surrounding islands. The boat small, light, and fast. It would save him time, probably enough so he'd be able to search an island every day. Kenji watched the stranger sail away. There had been something familiar about him, something that had reminded him of Hinoka. It was something in the color of the hair, the shape of the face. There was a similarity there he couldn't ignore. His personality was similar, too, down to earth and simple, yet upbeat. Both of them, they did what they had to do, worked hard, and generally maintained a good attitude about it. He needed to let the rebellion, actually, they weren't a rebellion anymore, they'd finally managed to depose Igura. He needed to let them know about the boy. And not just because of the familiarity of his features, but also because he'd been awfully suspicious. He'd needed a boat for travel, but he'd not said where he was going or why, nor had he mentioned where he'd come from. He'd been dressed in sturdy, nondescript clothing, without any identifying marks. Enji huffed, he'd not planned on going into the town proper until the end of the week, but the sooner the new Mizukage's people knew about him, the better. He went to the bar in town, which during the war had served as an information outpost for the rebellion, and he figured it still would be the Mizukage, powerful though he was, couldn't be in all places at once, and needed to know all about what was happening in his country. So he informed the barkeep of the boy, who would pass the information on to other members of the group, and they'd sent some shinobi to track him. It would be fine. Raiden's routine had changed very little from what he'd been doing before wake up, sail a row to the next island, strike camp, meditate in sage mode. If the island was big enough, he'd spend 2 or even 3 days to make sure he covered it all. In the 3 weeks since he'd gotten the boat, he'd made his way through the southern and eastern islands and was approaching the biggest northern island, which would take at least 5 days just on its own. It was a quarter the size of the main island. How long had it been now? He counted it up in his head and was surprised to realize it had been just over 2 months since he'd left Konoha. Just over 2 months since Tsunade had healed him, and one more, according to her prediction, that he had until his chakra coils started to collapse again. It was a bit worrying, but there was nothing he could do about it besides what he was already doing. So he moored his boat, pitched camp, set out his bedroll, ate a ration bar, and started meditating. Still no Sobu, but there was, however, a small town on the edge of the island, a kilometer or so from where he'd moored the boat. They shouldn't be a problem, it was better he just got some sleep. The scuff woke him moments before he was forcibly restrained, and though it was dark, he could make out a figure dressed in dull shades of dark green and blue, and wearing a mask. Hunter Nin. There was another one holding his arms behind his back, and there was probably another 1 or 2 of them somewhere around, just watching. He sighed. "Who are you?" the one in front of him asked. "Raiden. What is your purpose here?" "Well, I'm trying to find a cure for my terminal condition." The hunter Nin he could see made a hand sign, and there was a crinkling noise behind him. Paper, and Raiden's eyes widened. Wait, no. But the seal, a chakra inhibitor, had been placed on the back of his neck. On an ordinary person, it would have no effect. On a shinobi, it would prevent conscious control and restrict chakra flow to the minimum necessary for survival. On Raiden. The burning started in his gut and his chest tightened, restricting his breathing. He drew his knees up and hunched over in an attempt to ease the pain. It didn't help. The weakened flow of chakra through his coils had lessened the pressure, keeping them properly inflated. If this kept up for much longer, his coil would collapse, and if he couldn't get to the chakra tags in time, he'd die within a couple hours. "My bag," he wheezed, now barely able to talk. "Please, need seal tag." Because of course if anything counted as an emergency, this did. He wished he'd had more time until he'd had to use it, but he couldn't change it now. He coughed once, then again, and managed to catch his breath. "I'll die." One of the other hunter Nin appeared and pulled a tag out of Raiden's bag and placed it over the chakra inhibitor. 9 tails chakra flooded into him, burning away the inhibitor in the process. Raiden deepened his breathing gradually until it felt almost normal, then explained. "I can't use chakra right now. There's something here that can cure me, but I can't survive with less than a full volume of chakra in my coils. One is partially collapsed." The first hunter Nin nodded, then made more hand signs, and everything went black. He woke up later alone in a cell and groaned. Thankfully they hadn't put on another chakra inhibitor, but he'd been tied up securely. Thin cord circled his wrists and ankles, the latter having some slack so he could walk, and ninja wire wrap pinned his arms to his torso, tight enough that if he tried to break free, it would cut into his arms and chest. At least they hadn't killed him yet, though that was probably because they wanted to interrogate him. They'd also propped him up, which was nice. He waited a little while, maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, it was hard to tell, and the door opened. A man walked in. Was it one of the hunter Nin that had captured him? Apparently not. The man's eyes widened in surprise. He was right, you really do look like her. Wait. What? Was it possible they'd kept him alive for more than just interrogation? The man walked close and Raiden watched him warily, but he took out a kunai and sliced through the wire. He rolled his shoulders in relief. "Come on, we're going to see the Mizukage." That was confusing. Normally protocol was to go straight to T&I, at least that's what it was in Konoha, and he thought it would be especially so in Kiri, because she would have so much to do that delegation would be a necessity. Perhaps it was something to do with his resemblance to this mysterious her. The man put a blindfold on him and he was led out of the cell and down a hallway, then out of the building. They made a few detours and he just followed until they stopped and the blindfold was pulled off. They were in front of a door, the man knocked and a muffled but strangely familiar voice told them to enter. The man opened the door and Raiden just about tripped as he saw the new Mizukage. It wasn't Mei Terumi as he'd expected, the one who, as he remembered, had finally managed to depose Yugura. No, it was the one who in his time had failed and eventually died ignominiously, a shinobi without a village. But he had changed things, hadn't he? And who was to say what he'd changed hadn't had other effects? One of which being the identity of the Mizukage. He shrugged mentally and turned his attention to the others in the room. One was Ao the Kirin who'd been the Mizukage's right hand in his time, and the other was from what he could see, she had her back turned, a younger woman with her red hair in a thick braid. He squinted at her, their hair was almost the same color. That was odd, that shade of red was usually only found in members of the Uzumaki clan. She turned to face him, and he drew in a quick breath that she mirrored, the shape of their faces were almost exactly the same, though she had a bit rounder jaw and narrower eyes. But their cheekbones, their noses, they were the same. It was downright weird. "Hey, why is he tied up?" she asked pointedly. Apparently she wasn't aware of his current prisoner situation then. "And why does he look like me?" "Don't you know?" he asked cheerfully. "I'm a prisoner. They found me wandering around the country, so I'm obviously a spy for another nation." He smiled at her, a big fake grin. "Except for the part that I can't use chakra or I'll die." She frowned. "What's your name?" "Raiden Uzumaki, at your service. I'd greet you properly," but he held out his bound wrists in front of him and shrugged. She looked horrified. I'm Uzumaki, too. They can't treat you like this, your family." "Alright, Hinoka, settle down," Zabuza said. She looked about to retort, but he signaled something, and she clenched her jaw. Family he may be, but he has yet to properly explain himself and what he was doing in Mizu and sending out strange chakra pulses for weeks. Raiden was inwardly rejoicing, he'd found another family member. Granted, he wasn't in the best situation, but his family had just grown by one, and even with his situation she was already defending him. "So why are you here?" Zabuza asked. "Explain in detail." And truthfully. The truth was a bit fantastical. He'd do an edited version instead. "I was previously a Jinchuriki. My Biju was taken by a masked man." That was technically true, he'd had Kurama's yang half taken during the war. "My chakra system started collapsing, but due to my Uzumaki heritage, I was able to survive until I got healed by Lady Tsunade. It was temporary, however, and to survive I need a supply of Biju chakra for my system to repair itself. In effect, I need to become a Jinchuriki once again. I happen to know that you have a Biju floating around, the late Mizukage was one, so I decided to go for it." Ao butted in, looking angry. "You want our Biju?" "Yes. And what possessed you to think we would just let you take it?" "Not it. Him," Raiden said pointedly. "Truthfully, I'd hoped you wouldn't notice, but I now realize that was a long shot. But if that failed, I could offer you information. And, temporarily, certain services, perhaps recovering certain blades. And your other Jinchuriki." Zabuza frowned, the bandages around his mouth crinkling. "Untie him." Raiden sighed in relief and rubbed his wrists. The cords around his ankles were taken off, too. He glanced over at Hinoka, who looked excited. "Hinoka, you're keeping a watch on him until I decide what to do with him," Zabuza said. Raiden had one small point he wanted to make before they left. "If that's so, Mizukage-sama, I have two requests. First, may I have my belongings back? The tags I have in my pack are chakra stores that help keep me alive. And second, can you decide within a week? That's a bit before my chakra tags will run out." He bowed, and Zabuza, looking annoyed, agreed and shoot him out. Hinoka, too. The man who'd brought him there was waiting outside, and Hinoka notified him of Zabuza's order to collect his things. Chapter end. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, peace out.